polls now open for Tennessee's 7th congressional district, the election that is such a special election. You've got political heavyweights coming in town from all across the country. It is typically a very deep red congressional district that is up for grabs. President Trump, for example, carried it by 22 points last year. But Democratic leaders have a real chance here. They are rallying around Afton Bain, who has turned her messaging to affordability and the skyrocketing cost of living. The race is close, so close that House Speaker Mike Johnson has been on the ground campaigning with the Republican candidate, Matt Van Epps.
Oh man, are you seeing this? This is wild. This is absolutely wild. So Republicans just had what should have been an easy win in Tennessee's 7th congressional district. This should have been a blowout. This should have been a landslide victory. This is Tennessee we're talking about. This is a district that Trump won by 22 points in 2024. 22 points. That's a strong Republican district. That's a safe Republican district. That's the kind of district where Republicans should win by double digits. But instead, Republican Matt Van Epps barely, and I mean barely, held on to the seat. He won with about 53.9% of the vote. That's less than 54%. That's basically a coin flip in terms of margin. That's a 9-point win in a 22-point Trump district. Come on. This is bad news for Republicans. This is really bad news for Republicans heading into the 2026 midterms. And you can see it in the faces of GOP leaders right now. They're panicking. They're freaking out. They're trying to spin this as a victory, but everybody knows what this really means. This is a disaster. This is a warning sign. This is a flashing red light that Republicans are in trouble. Here's the thing that makes this so incredibly bad for the Republican Party. Approximately 180,000 voters participated in this special election. 180,000 people showed up. That's comparable to the 2022 midterms. That's high engagement. That's a lot of people voting. That's a lot of energy in the district. And the energy was mostly on the Democratic side. Democrats brought out the big guns for this race. They brought Kamala Harris. They brought Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Nationally famous Democrats were coming to Tennessee to support the Democratic candidate, Afton Bain. They mobilized their supporters. They organized their base. They campaigned hard. And it worked. It really worked. It energized the Democratic base. It got people voting. It got young people voting. It got progressive voters voting. And the result was a race that should have been a landslide for Republicans turned into basically a toss-up. A race that should have been decided by 20 points was decided by 9 points. That's not just concerning for Republicans. That's terrifying for Republicans. That's the kind of result that makes you sit up and pay attention. That's the kind of result that changes everything. And Trump's response to all this? He called it a great night for the Republican Party. A great night. Really? You barely held a safe seat and you're calling it a great night? That's either delusional or it's damage control. That's Trump trying to spin a bad result into a good result. That's Trump using his usual playbook of just declaring victory and hoping people believe him. But people aren't stupid. People know what a 9-point win in a 22-point Trump district means. It means Republicans are vulnerable. It means Trump's influence is not as strong as it used to be. It means Democratic energy is high. It means we're heading into a 2026 midterm that could be very different from what Republicans expected. And that's a big deal. That changes everything about the political landscape. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. Now, the reason this matters is because Tennessee's 7th district is supposed to be one of the safest Republican seats in the entire country. It's in the South. It's a conservative district. It's a Trump-loving district. Trump won it big in 2024. So if Republicans are struggling there, if they're barely holding on, what does that mean for other districts that aren't as safe? What does that mean for districts that are more purple? What does that mean for districts that have been trending more Democratic in recent years?
In less than 2 weeks, we're going to get our next clues on how voters are feeling ahead of the midterms. It will come from a special election in a solidly Republican congressional district in the middle of Tennessee, one where Democrats are hoping they can pull off an upset. Former Vice President Kamala Harris even made a surprise appearance for the Democrat there this week. The first time she's joined a candidate on the campaign trail since leaving office.
If Republicans can barely hold a safe district, they're going to get crushed in competitive districts. That's the math. That's the implication. That's the scary part. And that's what has GOP leaders panicked right now. They're looking at this result and saying, if we can barely win in Tennessee 7, we're going to get destroyed in Georgia and Arizona and Michigan and Pennsylvania in the midterms. This is a warning sign. This is a preview of coming attractions. This is what the future looks like. And here's what makes this even worse for Republicans. This wasn't supposed to be close. The Republican candidate had Trump's endorsement. Trump came out and endorsed Matt Van Epps. So this wasn't like Trump was sitting on the sidelines. Trump was involved. Trump was putting his weight behind the Republican candidate. Trump was saying, vote for this guy. And the Republican candidate still barely won. That says something about Trump's power to move voters. That says something about whether Trump's endorsement actually matters anymore. Because if Trump's endorsement was powerful, the Republican should have won big, but the Republican barely won. So what does that tell you about Trump's influence? What does that tell you about Trump's ability to energize Republican voters? It tells you that maybe Trump's not as powerful as he thinks he is. It tells you that maybe Trump's influence is fading. It tells you that maybe Republicans need to start thinking about a different strategy. And that's a problem for Trump. That's a problem for Republicans. That's a big problem heading into the midterms. Okay, so let's break down what actually happened in this Tennessee special election and why it's such a big deal for the Republican Party. The surface story is that a Republican won a special election in Tennessee. That sounds normal. That sounds like Republicans are doing fine. That sounds like everything is okay. But underneath that surface story, there's a much bigger story about the state of the Republican Party and Trump's influence, and whether Republicans can actually hold on to Congress in 2026. Understanding this story is key to understanding what's happening with the Republican Party right now and where we're headed as a country. So let's start with the basics of what happened. Matt Van Epps is the Republican who won this race. Afton Bain is the Democrat who ran against him. This was a special election for Tennessee's 7th Congressional District. Now this is a real district, real seat, real election with real stakes. This isn't some abstract thing or some theoretical exercise. This is about who gets to represent Tennessee in Congress. This is about who gets to vote on bills. This is about who gets to influence policy. This is about real power. And Republicans should have won this easily. Should have been a landslide, should have been over before it started. But it wasn't. And that's the story that matters. That's what we need to focus on. Van Epps got 53.9% of the vote. That's the winning number. Bain got a significant portion too. She was competitive. She was in the race. She was fighting. She wasn't just a token candidate. And that's unusual for a Democratic candidate in a district like this. Tennessee 7 is not a purple district. It's not a swing district. It's a Republican district. It's a safe Republican district. It's the kind of district where the Republican candidate just shows up and wins. That's how it normally works. But this year, the Democratic candidate was competitive. This year, the Democratic candidate had resources. This year, the Democratic candidate had energy and support. And that made all the difference. That's why this race was so close. That's why Republicans are panicked. That's why GOP leaders are worried about the future. Now, Trump won this district by 22 points in the presidential election in 2024. That was just a little more than a year ago, so the political environment was already Republican-friendly in this district. The voters in this district already voted for Trump. They already showed that they're Trump voters. They already showed that they support Trump and the Republican Party. They clearly support Republican values and Republican candidates. But when it came to this special election, they were much less enthusiastic about the Republican candidate. The margin dropped from 22 points down to 9 points. That's a 13-point swing. That's massive. That's the kind of swing that could flip purple districts. That's the kind of swing that could turn safe seats into competitive seats. That's the kind of swing that should terrify Republicans. And the reason for that swing is partly because Democrats energized their base. They brought in heavy hitters. They brought Kamala Harris to campaign. They brought Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They brought national figures who could energize young voters and progressive voters and Democratic voters in general. They mobilized their base. They organized their supporters. They showed up, and it worked. The Democrats mobilized their base. The Democrats got their voters to turn out. The Democrats showed that they can compete in districts that normally favor Republicans. And that's a new development. That's not something that was happening before. Democrats are usually at a disadvantage in Republican-leaning districts. Usually, Democrats don't have the resources or the energy to compete. But this year, with resources and organization and national support, Democrats made this race competitive. They fought hard. And that signals a potential shift in the political landscape heading into 2026. So what does Van Epps' victory actually mean for the Republican Party? Well, technically, it means Republicans held the seat. Republicans didn't lose the seat. The seat didn't flip to a Democrat. So from a raw seat count perspective, Republicans didn't lose ground. They kept what they had. But from a strategic perspective, this is a disaster. This is a warning sign. This tells Republicans that they're going to have to fight harder in districts they thought were safe. This tells Republicans that they can't just assume they're going to win in Republican-leaning districts anymore. This tells Republicans that Democrats have momentum and energy and resources. And if Democrats have momentum and energy and resources in a Republican-leaning district like Tennessee 7, what are they going to be able to do in a truly competitive district? What are they going to be able to do in a district that's actually purple? What are they going to be able to do in districts that are trending Democratic? The answer is they're probably going to win. And that's what has Republicans panicked. And then there's the Trump factor. Trump endorsed Van Epps. Trump put his weight behind the Republican candidate. Trump said, vote for this guy. Trump used his platform and his influence to try to help the Republican win, and the Republican candidate still barely won. So what does that tell you about Trump? What does that tell you about Trump's ability to move voters? What does that tell you about Trump's influence in the Republican Party? Well, it tells you that Trump's endorsement is not as powerful as it used to be. It tells you that Trump's endorsement doesn't automatically guarantee a landslide. It tells you that voters in Republican districts are not lockstep behind Trump anymore. They're not automatically voting for whoever Trump endorses. They're thinking for themselves. They're considering the Democratic candidate. They're considering the stakes. And that's different from what Trump has seen in the past. In Trump's mind, Trump's endorsement should be worth 20, 30, 50 points. It should be the difference between winning and losing. But in this race, Trump endorsed the Republican, and the Republican barely won. So Trump's power is not what Trump thinks it is. Trump tried to spin this as a victory. He said it was a great night for the Republican Party. But that's not what GOP leaders are saying. GOP leaders are panicked. GOP leaders are saying this is a dangerous result. GOP leaders are saying this is a sign that Republicans are vulnerable. GOP leaders are starting to worry about whether they can hold on to the House in the midterms. GOP leaders are starting to realize that what happened in Tennessee could happen in other districts. And if it happens in enough other districts, Republicans could lose the House. Republicans could lose control. Republicans could lose their majority. And that's what has them worried. That's why you're seeing panic among Republican leadership. That's why you're seeing different GOP leaders trying to manage this result and trying to figure out how to prevent this from happening in other districts. All right, so let's break this down into the actual points that matter. Let's understand what this Tennessee election really means for the Republican Party and for the 2026 midterms. Because this election is actually more important than people realize. It's not just about one seat in Tennessee, it's about the entire political landscape heading into the midterms. It's about the future of Congress. It's about the future of the Republican Party. Point number one, Democrats have energy and momentum heading into 2026. Come on, think about what just happened. Democrats brought Kamala Harris to Tennessee. Democrats brought Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to Tennessee. Democrats invested money and resources into a race in a Republican-leaning district. They put real effort in. They put real resources in. They put real energy in. And it almost worked. They almost won. They made it competitive. They showed that they can compete in districts that Republicans thought were safe. That's a sign of Democratic energy and momentum. That's a sign that Democrats think they can win in 2026. That's a sign that Democrats believe they can flip Republican seats. And when Democrats think they can win, they mobilize, they organize, they bring in resources, they campaign hard, they show up. And that's what happened in Tennessee. And if Democrats have that kind of energy and momentum in Tennessee, they probably have it in other places too. They probably have it in Georgia. They probably have it in Arizona. They probably have it in Michigan. They probably have it in Pennsylvania. And that's a problem for Republicans. That's why Republicans are panicked. Point number two, Trump's endorsement and Trump's influence are not as powerful as they used to be. Come on, let's be honest about what this result shows. Trump endorsed the Republican candidate. Trump put his name behind the Republican candidate. Trump gave his endorsement. And the Republican candidate won with barely 54% of the vote in a district Trump won by 22 points. That's not a success. That's a failure. That's a sign that Trump's endorsement doesn't automatically guarantee a landslide victory. That's a sign that Trump's name and Trump's endorsement are not as powerful as Trump thinks they are. That's a sign that Trump's influence is declining. And that changes things. That changes the political landscape. Because if Trump's endorsement doesn't work in a Republican-leaning district like Tennessee 7, where does it work? What kind of district does Trump's endorsement actually move the needle in? And if Trump's endorsement doesn't move the needle anymore, what good is it to Republican candidates? What good is Trump to the Republican Party? These are questions that Republican candidates are probably asking themselves right now, and these are questions that don't have good answers for Trump. These are uncomfortable questions for the Trump administration. Point number three, Republicans are going to lose seats in the 2026 midterms. This is not a maybe. This is not a possibility. This is a likelihood. This is something that's probably going to happen, because if Democrats can make Tennessee 7 competitive, they can make other districts competitive too. They can make Georgia competitive. They can make Arizona competitive. They can make Michigan competitive. They can make Pennsylvania competitive. They can make other districts competitive as well. And if Democrats make enough districts competitive, they're going to win some of those districts. And when Democrats win districts, Republicans lose seats. And when Republicans lose enough seats, they lose control of the House. And that's what's going to happen in 2026 if this trend continues. Republicans are going to lose the House. Republicans are going to lose their majority, and that's why Republicans are panicked. That's why you're seeing panic among GOP leadership. They understand the math. They understand that if this trend continues, they're going to get crushed in the midterms. Point number 4. This is a preview of what 2026 is going to look like. This is a preview of how Democrats are going to campaign. This is a preview of how competitive the midterms are going to be. This is a sign of things to come. Democrats are going to invest in races. Democrats are going to bring national figures to campaign. Democrats are going to energize their base. Democrats are going to show up and fight in districts that Republicans thought were safe. Democrats are going to compete everywhere. And Republicans are going to have to respond. Republicans are going to have to invest money. Republicans are going to have to bring national figures. Republicans are going to have to energize their base. And all of that costs money. All of that takes time. All of that takes resources. And Republicans might not be prepared for that. Republicans might not have the resources to compete in as many districts as they're going to need to compete in. And that's going to be a problem, a big problem. And here's the thing about Trump's involvement in the Tennessee race. Trump took credit for the victory. Trump said it was a great night for the Republican Party. Trump took credit for the win. Trump took full credit. But Trump didn't take responsibility for the fact that the race was too close. Trump didn't take responsibility for the fact that the Republican candidate barely won. Trump didn't take responsibility for the fact that his endorsement and his influence weren't enough to deliver a landslide victory. Trump just took the good part and ignored the bad part. And that's typical Trump. That's what Trump always does. Trump takes credit for victories and blames other people for defeats. Trump celebrates wins and makes excuses for losses. But voters and observers and political analysts, they see through that. They understand what really happened. They understand that the Republican candidate barely won. And they understand that that's bad news for Republicans. They understand the implications. So what happens next? Well, the 2026 midterms are coming up, and Republicans are going to have to figure out how to hold on to their majority. Republicans are going to have to figure out how to compete with Democrats. Republicans are going to have to figure out how to energize their base and motivate their voters. And that's going to be hard. That's going to be difficult. That's going to be challenging. Because right now, Democrats have momentum. Right now, Democrats have energy. Right now, Democrats are showing that they can compete in districts that Republicans thought were safe. And that changes everything about how Republicans are going to approach the midterms. The Tennessee special election was supposed to be a Republican victory, and technically it was. Republicans won. But strategically, it was a disaster. Strategically, it showed that Republicans are vulnerable. Strategically, it showed that Democrats can compete. Strategically, it showed that the 2026 midterms are going to be much more competitive than Republicans thought. And that's the real story of the Tennessee election. That's what really matters. That's what's going to shape the 2026 midterms and everything that comes after.